Kirsty here with the Truth Teller Project. We're here doing another interview with my wonderful guest tonight, Aaron Barnes. Hey, Aaron, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Aaron is going to share with us his journey of dealing with this country around prescription drugs. And you had posted a blog post where you titled it something along the lines of, that piece of paper, ruined your life. And I think that what came to my mind is, had this been, rather than Oxycodone, which for those who don't know is a very commonly used prescription drug in this country that a lot of doctors are handing out for people with wisdom teeth, with back operations, with back pain, and it is from the opiate family, I believe the same poppy plant as heroin. So it has very similar effects and is highly addictive, and yet we're giving this to sometimes 16, 17, 18-year-old kids who are having minor operations like wisdom teeth, knee operations. And I know countless people who've been offered it on scripts when they've had operations like that. Now, I remember when I had those operations as a kid, we were given Panadol Forte or some kind of stronger headache pill, Tylenol or something plus, but that was it. But now it's these prescription drugs. So what came to my mind to ask you was, if you had have been given, instead of saying this is Oxycodone, if they had have been honest and said, this is part of the opiate family, this is the same or similar to heroin in terms of addiction, and given it to you with a needle and a spoon, do you think that you would have felt differently about this journey, or you perhaps maybe wouldn't have started in the first place than the ease it was with it being a script in a bottle from a doctor?
Yeah, thanks, Christy. I think that, yes, definitely. For me, the needle and the spoon represented like a dirty drug user, even though I know it's silly, but I mean, for me, it kind of represented a dirty drug and put it in a separate category. Whereas this, the administration of the pill, it was such an easy thing. I walked into a safe pharmacy. My doctor gave me the piece of paper. It was easy to take. I just swallowed a pill or whatever. I eventually, of course, turned to taking it in different forms, but never got to the point where I would shoot up or anything like that. So, but yeah, it definitely would have made me think twice as far as how I would have categorized the drug. But it was so, I hate to use the word sugar coated when when it's a pill, but you think of it as an aspirin or maybe a Pepto-Bismol. You just have that pill mentality that, again, and also the fact it was coming from my local pharmacy and my doctor originally was definitely changed my perspective of it.
Yeah, and I think that that's how we're at this place where we are, where we have 6 people dying in one city. And, Utah, which is a Mormon state, and I know you grew up Mormon, and you mentioned that, there's a part of it where it was taboo to mention alcohol or drugs. But this is locked on to some of those communities more than others because it is that taboo-ness, but then there's the same that this isn't as taboo because this is coming from a doctor. So they almost do feel like this is acceptable and this is okay.
Yeah, it's like my doctor gave it to me. I trust them. I know them. They're there to help me, which, of course, we all know that's true. It's not that they're there to harm you. It's just it's such an easy thing to write a script and then not realize the after effects that, each person can respond or react very differently. Everyone's body's different. Some people may take it, never become an addict, but a good chance, especially with opioids, that you can become addicted very easily.
Yeah.
So it's the aftermath, I think, sometimes that's forgotten when that script walks out the door.
Well, and I think, you made the comment about sugarcoating, and I'm sure that many doctors are there trying to do the right thing, but I think some are completely uneducated and uninformed. They themselves don't realize that these, originally certainly didn't realize the effects of it. I think now it's becoming more and more prevalent and a lot are realizing, but they're also in bed with big pharma and the insurance companies, and there's a lot of money to push these drugs and to get people taking them. So I think that there is an element where it's not always for our best interest, and we need to educate and inform ourselves and have these conversations. So for anyone who's just tuning in, please comment, share your questions, engage in the conversation. We'll see them as they come up on the screen, and I'll stop intermittently and reference them and go through anything that we need to. I know that a couple of people who had mentioned on the post who were going to join in had also, either one lady had lost a child herself to it, who had started on opiates at 16 and by 18 or 19 was dead in her bed from a heroin overdose. So it is sadly a really common story and something that we need to be talking about. And when I made the post online, a couple of different people had different responses to it. And I knew that it was opening up a can of worms, as I'm sure you've had this experience when you start talking about prescription drugs and addiction in the same sentence. People can get really defensive around taking those prescription drugs that the doctor gave them. And I think also, one mother made a comment because her child does have ADHD. And I get that this can be a trigger for them, that they can feel stigmatized for using something that is genuinely needed in a mental health situation. But I also think that there are just as many children who are overdiagnosed, who are overscripted. I mean, we know the numbers show us that there is no way the amount of millions of people diagnosed as having ADHD and anxiety that weren't necessary just 5 short years ago, literally millions. That to me is all about you follow the money, you follow the numbers, and look at Big Pharma. So they're making issues and statements that then affect these children and young adults for the rest of their life. So tell me a little bit about, you have spoken with me previously about how this sort of started. And interestingly, when you wrote the bullet points out for me on talking points and you wrote your history out a bit, you said it really kind of got you thinking about all the foundational little things that might appear small in our childhood and our teen years. But when we have that angst and that anxiety and we don't have coping skills, or our parents aren't involved in our day-to-day life, we can start to internalize a lot of things. So what do you think really laid the foundation for you to start on this path of numbing and using substances in this way to cope?
Each person experiences different levels of trauma. I mean, obviously it goes back to childhood trauma, which is something I've had the opportunity to learn a little bit about. And each of us go through different levels. Of course, my childhood, I had a great childhood. Definitely had a little bit of bullying in my childhood. When I was young, my ears stuck out. Of course, at a young age, kids can be mean, as we've discussed a little bit, Christine. That
mine too.
Yeah. So I at a young age, yeah, the Dumbo. That was the favorite word to use. But of course, the bullying, can have a tough impact on a kid, and really made me question some things, and hurt my self-confidence, and of course angered me also as well. And then you mentioned raised in the Mormon church, so it was a little bit, I will use the word lightly, sheltered, in the sense that, we didn't talk a whole lot about drugs and alcohol as far as maybe why not to use them, or just don't do it. So it was I was a little bit ill prepared by the time that I got to college, and really tasted freedom for the first time. And then, of course, tried fraternity life out and got my own apartment. And that's really where it all took off for me, was when I did not have, like you said, the coping skills or whatever I wasn't prepared when I got to college for all the things that, came along with that environment, or can come along with that environment. So
you mentioned like the anger that, as a child, and obviously, and then talking about like the suppression within your family's beliefs and the religion and that. Do you think that also had an impact in terms of you just not even knowing how to feel feelings and have some outlet for processing them in a healthy way?
Yeah, I didn't have the necessary tools in my tool belt. At no fault of anyone's other than my own. I ultimately take responsibility for all of my actions. Now these days, it's just a matter of, I guess I wasn't as educated as I would have liked to have been about certain things, that when I was able to taste freedom, but at the same time, I believe I always had an addictive personality, kind of a go big or go home. I was always that way, whether it was riding my bike or playing sports. I was always a go big kind of guy, kid guy. So, I think it was a perfect storm, perfect mix for me whenever I did get out on my own and had some freedoms. And then I was a little sheltered growing up. I think that ultimately it was a perfect storm, or a combination to where, addiction started to hit me at a young age.
I want to come back to a couple of those things about the toolbox and the going big and going home later on in the interview, but I want to stay sort of back when it first began for now. And so in your early 20s, obviously this had escalated over about a 10-year period. You were using alcohol, cocaine, ecstasy, hallucinogens, marijuana, club drugs, and even at one point selling and trafficking drugs to support your lifestyle. So then, you had a couple of marriages, a couple of daughters, you found yourself divorced. And I noticed one of the things that you made mention of is that you felt, that was kind of after your early 30s and the second rehab attempt that the addiction really kicked in, and that the turning point for you was you just felt that you were going to spend the rest of your life alone because of the massive baggage and the label that you had on yourself that you were damaged goods.
Yeah.
So I find that so interesting because when I first met you at our local Starbucks in Santa Monica, you know, you are incredibly handsome for all the ladies out there tuning in. You're a very good looking guy. You're very articulate. You know, you're obviously doing really well for yourself. And so to me, that, you know, is just so interesting, the disconnect in how you believed about yourself and thought about yourself internally. But I've also seen on your Instagram page and fitness pages, is it at Sober Coaching?
At Sober Coaching, Aaron. Yes, at Sober.
Aaron, Aaron, AA. So at Sober Coaching, Aaron, you have some before and after pictures as well. And you've had quite a transformation in terms of your health and your well-being and really looking after yourself. You're incredibly fit for those that can't see his muscles right now. But, you know, again, like you were in a place where you weren't looking after yourself or your body. You were feeling really depressed and didn't have a high self-confidence or self-worth. And you really felt like this life was done. You'd had failed marriages and had children from different women, and you thought nobody's going to want to take me on with all of that.
Yes. Yeah, that's you said a lot in a short bit there. You know, this is a prime example of how our perception is not always reality. Oftentimes it's not. I had, like you said, labeled myself as damaged goods through my own choices and my own irresponsibility and immaturity and reckless behavior. A lot of often stem from drugs and alcohol, but yes, I had two daughters at an early age from two different women, and therefore I started to experience some very deep shame and guilt, remorse, embarrassment, confusion. I was scared. There was so many overwhelming emotions from those two traumatic, if you will, experiences. Although they were beautiful for me as a young man, they were traumatic because again, I had what I thought was really done some harm to my life work because I wasn't able to rise up and be the man I needed to be, mainly because of my reckless lifestyle I was living. And so then whenever in my early 30s, when I did get married and had another child and had a short marriage and divorced, at that point, I really thought that was my finishing blow in life. I thought, who in the world in their right mind is going to want to be with me? I'd been to rehab twice. I was known as a party animal, a complete out of control, wild man who work hard, play hard mentality with, 3 kids, 3 women. I literally thought that I was going to spend the rest of my life alone. And I think what made it even more trivial for me, Kirsty, was, being raised Mormon, families, the family aspect is huge. Families are forever. The family entity is number one. So it was kind of a mind game that I was playing inside of my own mind. Was I have really created a future for myself that I just could not bear to comprehend, that because I really, if I back up and put it on a whiteboard, all of the damage or the luggage I was carrying around with me by my early 30s, I'm like, I wouldn't want to be with him.
Which is all our own self-judgment.
That's right.
So I think for anybody out there who's listening, this is an incredibly important point, whether you're going through addiction or not, in terms of how we judge ourselves, what we believe is true that actually isn't true, that we think that, the final chapters aren't written. Unless you're 99, you have got time, whether it's a year or 5 years or 10 years or 50 more years, you have time to rewrite those last chapters. So for anyone out there who is struggling and who is feeling like they have fucked up their entire life and by the standards that they've been brought up with, and that they haven't gotten there, that they're not good enough, that they haven't done everything that they wanted, whatever it is, I think just know that you can press pause at any moment and you can reroute yourself, or as my friend Karen, the GPS girl, says, you can recalculate. So Aaron, if you could press pause at that moment when you felt like that and you thought, I've got this massive baggage, no one's going to want me, all those feelings which were right before things went even worse and downhill for you and you really started on the opiate addiction path. If you could have pressed pause then, what would you say to that Aaron? What did he need to hear in that moment? What could you have said that would make him see or think differently, or what could he have done then that would change the trajectory of things?
It's one of those things. I believe that the journey is perfect. And I honestly, I know this is going to sound odd, but I have no regrets.
Yeah.
I
I have no regrets either. I'm from the same belief and the same philosophy, and I wouldn't change a thing. But if we were just playing a game, like we wouldn't change this Aaron's trajectory because it had to go that way. It was perfectly the experience you had to have. But what did he need to hear that might have made him feel different? Or if you were with someone who's in that exact same scenario, who feels that lonely and isolated and dejected about everything in life, what do you think would help?
The number one thing, what comes to my mind, I mean, obviously, like I said, my pathway is my pathway, and the journey that I took is what I needed to get to this point right here talking to you. However, the one thing I would have told myself back then is you cannot possibly understand the people who love you, how bad you're hurting them. I think that, you know, to have a self-talk, to realize, because you're so selfish in addiction, you just cannot see how bad, how many sleepless nights my mother had, my family had, those who were around me that cared about me, that were stepping away from me because they couldn't watch the train wreck in front of them. I think I would have told myself, do you not see and can you not understand how bad you're hurting the people that love you the most? And that may have had you know, at the time, again, it's hard to look back, hindsight. But I definitely would have told myself, you know, looking back now, because I do see the damage that I caused, and you know, the hurt and the pain on all those years. So it's definitely something I would have told myself, that you're crushing those who love you the most.
Well, and Kimberly has just joined us and said she loves me, and I love you too, Kimberly. And Kimberly's the lady that I mentioned earlier, had lost her daughter at 19 after starting on Oxycodone opiates through her wisdom teeth operation and ending up a heroin addict. So I'm sure that those words speak to her. And I know that, you know, as you say, addicts don't have that ability sometimes when they're in the moment to understand how many people they're hurting around us. And I want to talk a little bit about that later, because I know that you do some transportation and help with families who are dealing with addiction. So I want to come back to that. But in terms of, you know, being selfish and what this addiction looks like, what if we were to be a fly on the wall, once you started, you know, you went in, you got that first script, you thought, I've got back pain, you're already sort of using different substances, but you didn't think this is heroin or this is going to have this impact on your life. You started on it. How quickly did it escalate?
It was rapid. Again, I had never experimented really with opiates very much, maybe, you know, here or there, but to have a full-blown script in my hand, you know, with hundreds of high dosage oxycodone pills, it was like nothing I'd ever had. I often tell people, I thought that I had found the drug Huey Lewis was talking about, in that, you know, it was perfect. I thought it was insurance was paying for it. It was easy to take. It was easy to carry around. It wasn't illegal because I had a script. I mean, it was all the things and the way it makes you feel. Of course, I'm not going to go into that too much, but it seemed like the perfect drug that I had found in my late 30s.
You started, I'm assuming they just gave you one a day, or you were supposed to only be having a small amount, and how many are you taking? And
of course, it always starts out, you know, we were doing, I remember there was time I was 3, 4, you know, at a time. Next thing you know, I was snorting 10 at a time. I mean, it's so progressive, so fast. You know, a month script that was supposed to last 30 days would last, you know, a week. It literally would be gone. And then unfortunately you have to turn because to avoid withdrawals, you know, you quickly turn to the street to buy the pills. And so it became very financially taxing as well very quickly.
Right. And so you turn to the streets. I mean, what does this even look like? At this point, is any part of your brain saying this isn't okay? I've now am, like you made the comment earlier that you saw heroin as dirty, or the street sort of side of it. At this point, has shame kicked in? Are you too far in the addiction to care? The withdrawal's too bad that did any part of you go, I should go to rehab now?
It became all consuming in the sense that withdrawal is so hard to explain, but it's so brutal. Opioid withdrawal is so excruciating that you literally will do anything to avoid it. I mean, you will, and that's, I think, where addiction starts to metamorphosize the person that you are into this shell of who you once were. it wasn't me. It was me, but at the same time, it was the addiction that was overwhelming. It was uncontrollable. You will do anything to avoid that withdrawal and that feeling of complete hell. There's no other hell on earth. There's no other way to describe it. So yeah, of course, in your mind, you know that obviously this is a no-win situation. Everything about it is bad. I mean, there's nothing possibly rational that you could perceive. At the same time, the addicted brain is a hijacked brain. You have to realize that there's it's your thoughts all revolve almost 24 hours a day around not going through withdrawal and avoiding that experience.
So what did life start to look like? Because I think that, again, you think in the beginning, well, this numbs my pain. I've got all of these problems in life, and it all seems rosy and you're floating on a cloud and you're feeling great. And then it very quickly turns the other way. So if we were to look in the window and see you on one of those days at the end when you were snorting it and doing 10 at a time, what did your life look like?
Not human. I often tell people it's like a zombie. You're the living dead. The body thing, the things that happen to you physically are horrible. The sweats, the aches, the flu-like symptoms, and it's just again, and it just is so progressive in that eventually you're bedridden. I tell people, who I discuss my addiction with personally, I say, I was never physically addicted to any of those party or club or street, the fun drugs at the time when I was going through my tour. We were just having fun, we thought. I was never physically addicted. Opioids were the first thing that I was physically addicted to, meaning I had to physically have it to function. All the other ones I could sleep off or go on a bender and, sleep off the hangover eventually and, get back on my feet. Opioids, they were the first thing that brought me to my knees. I was unable to rise up on my own and stop using it. So that's where.
Well, and this is the thing, I remember, what was that? There was a movie when we were kids. Was it Train Spotting? That was around heroin, and it was so traumatic. I think the baby died while they were doing heroin. Like, they just, as you say, you're in a bubble. You don't care about anything else. And I remember that scared the living crap out of us. I don't think anyone was ever going to touch drugs after watching that movie in our generation. But I don't think we have that same fear anymore. And I think part of it is because everyone is pulling to the script. I think too many people, really don't go. These friends of mine I shared earlier who have gone in for operations. My first question is, or when they talk about having to go for an operation, I'm warning them. I'm like, your doctor's going to give you a script. When you go for your wisdom tooth, you go for a knee operation or you do this, and they're going to give you do not take it. I'm like, you have to understand that this is heroin, and go and get some Tylenol Plus or whatever it is or something else. But I really don't think enough people get the severity of how highly addictive this stuff is, and that you're done. You think you can cope. You think you can take 1 or 2 tablets for a couple of days and then you'll be able to get off it. That is not the case for everybody.
Not for a lot of people, actually. So yeah, it's very easy to become addicted, and that's what's sad. I think, like I said, not to go down the pharmacy route, the pharmaceutical company route, but unfortunately, I think it is something that's so easy to become addicted to this, that there has to be alternatives. I mean, like you said, there are options, holistic options for pain. That so many people, it's the society though where it's take a pill, fix a problem. That we live in, and then of course, like you said, money's in charge. Money rules all. And in the US, you're really conditioned for that. Like, as an Australian coming in 6 years ago, I remember in the beginning on cable seeing the television commercials for all the pharmaceuticals. We don't have that in Australia. You're not actually allowed to even advertise. So you are being brainwashed as you watch those commercials for decades before you get to this point of thinking it's okay to take a pill. We have for years taken an Advil or watch mum and dad take Xanax. It's become such a normal thing in this culture. In LA, they have Xanax in the drinking water and antidepressants in the drinking water now because they're made with some kind of chemical that can't be broken down. So what does that tell you? How many people are drinking it, that we are eating it, and it's in their urine, that it's coming back into our water supplies? Like, we have a problem. Yeah. And so if you are one of those people that are taking something and you think that it's okay just to help you get to sleep or to help you get through some pain, or I say, look, I get that there's a very, very, very small percentage of people that maybe there's no other option, or
there's nothing that will work. But I think that for a bigger majority, it is easier. And what I would also ask them is, have you tried anything else first? Have you tried meditation? Like, we know that meditation, if they could put that in a pill, is far more powerful than any of those drugs and Xanax combined. We know that exercise is the number one thing on a list of 100 things for depression, including electroshock therapy. The number one is 10 minutes of exercise to elevate our mood. We have naturally designed chemicals, and I know you've gone down this path as a personal trainer now, where you're all about those endorphins and those good natural highs. But that's the thing I would also say to people. As you can see, I get very passionate about all of this, but look at, are you doing anything else first? You know, have you tried any natural things? Have you tried meditation? Have you tried exercising before bed to, you know, have you tried counseling and therapy? Because the majority of people who go to a prescription drug are also trying to numb something, whether it's physical or emotional, or sometimes the emotional come out as physical. And so I really want to inspire and encourage people to try something else first. And I know that for you now, you didn't find them first, you found them in reverse, but you found them and you've been able to heal. So I always ask people, if your healing was a jigsaw puzzle and there was one or two key pieces to that healing, what do you feel were some of those big chunks that without them you wouldn't be where you are today?
Great question. There are some key things. Number one, of course, I was able to get to rehab through the help of my family. I was able to go through detox and get and avoid going through the horrific withdrawal symptoms. I was able to detox in rehab. I did spend 60 days in rehab where I did have quite a spiritual awakening, and so I will contribute several factors to my my initial sobriety and my long-term so far recovery. Number one is that I realized that all of those things in my life that I was holding inside, the shame and the guilt and the anger, the frustration, all of those things were from events that I needed in my life. I was able to literally have a moment of clarity, and almost like a flashbang of clarity, when I was in rehab, where I realized that all those things I was holding on to were for my absolute and maximum benefit. I needed them, and there was opportunity to learn and grow and gain strength, and then also help others. So when I got sober, and I did have that kind of pivotal mind shift, if you will, of all of the ways that I kind of perceived the things that had happened to me or will happen, that had happened for me in my past or that will happen for me in my future. I was able to embrace those. I also...
Can you give me one example?
Oh, for sure. The bullying, we'll start all the way back to the beginning, where I experienced bullying at a young age. I realize now that, of course, it built character. It gave me a little thicker skin. Also, I now talk to my son quite often about bullying, how to cope with it, how to, because I know firsthand, I'm now able to use those experiences to help educate and work with him and talk about the giving and receiving part of bullying. But definitely it molded me into who I am today and gave me kind of an unknown strength that I didn't realize I was gaining. So those people that bullied me when I was young, about my years, they actually, as you can probably relate, did me a favor. So thank you.
Yes, I feel exactly the same way about my childhood bullies. And I think it gives us empathy, builds character, but it also gives you that empathy. You understand that everybody has problems internally that they're not always sharing externally. Yeah. And so you mentioned in the beginning that you were always that go big, go huge kind of guy. And part of that adrenaline seeking rush in your early years, high school, college years, really you were attracted to this because it has the same activation in the reward center and different parts of the brain, really, using drugs as something like if you were mountain climbing or bungee jumping, or I like to use the idea of like being an entrepreneur and being successful in business. But if you don't have any of those things, I really feel like a big part of it in those younger years where we're trying to get teens through this without them going down that path. And I was definitely a thrill seeker. I had my own, in my early 20s, had my own issues with using too much food and drinks and alcohol and pot. And I look back and I think a big part of it was boredom and thrill seeking that I now get through my work and through having a purpose and knowing what it is I'm here to do in the world. So do you feel like that has been something that you've like addressed where the energy goes, if you will?
Absolutely. The go big, go home really hasn't changed. I just shifted it into positives in my life, to kind of bring that back to some of the things that I believe that, you know, the changes that I made in my life will go big. Of course, whenever I got sober, I dove into fitness. As you mentioned earlier, I really believe that fitness is critical to recovery. Also, the people I coach, I tell them all the time, I'm like, fitness is critical to recovery. It gives you back your self-confidence. It gives you back your self-esteem. It helps in so many aspects, you know, your sleep, there's so many benefits to it. I could go on and on. Of course, nutrition. I got really big into nutrition of what I ate.
And you got really big.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's just, it comes with the territory, you know what I mean? And so, and then also volunteer work. You know, I became real big into volunteer work because I wanted to really reverse the selfishness that I had done and give back and be selfless. And I think so, you know, I'm really, for me in my recovery, the go big, go home personality goes into fitness, nutrition, and volunteer work. That's really where I try and
I love that.
To go big. So, yeah.
Well, I think that, you know, so you mentioned that you doing the volunteer in a way kind of is your way of balancing out the selfishness. And I'm sure, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you still hold guilt around. And your mum, I know, was there for you right up until the end. And I don't know if every parent has the stamina to do that with their children. So you were very lucky, because it is a hard journey for anyone who's witnessing somebody going down this path. Until they're ready, there's really not a lot you can do. What do you still hold any of that guilt now, or have you been able to work through it?
Oh, no. That was one of the most amazing things is when I had my spiritual awakening when I was at rehab. I literally realized that, well, because I was holding on to some things very deeply. And when I realized those things, those specific events and those people were absolutely placed in my life, Christy, for my benefit at the exact right time, then I started thinking, well, how can I pick and choose which things were placed in front of me at the right time perfectly? Can I just say, well, that was for my benefit, but that wasn't? You know, I can't pick and choose. I have a saying that I live by, and to this day, I actually picked it up while I was at rehab. But to this day, I still, on my phone every morning, I live by a statement, and that statement is everything that happens to me is the best possible thing that can happen to me. And so I can't say, well, that's 99.9%. Everything means 100, all things that happen to me are for my absolute benefit. I need them, and I can use them as opportunities to grow and help others. And so I looked at my past, and then I realized, well, if all the things in my past were perfect and meant to happen to me when they did, how they did, then how can I question my future? Meaning everything that's going to happen to me, my future is also perfect in every way. I need it, and right time. It's a beautiful existence when you realize that everything is in harmony and in sync, and therefore you really can't have a quote unquote bad thing happen to you. You only have events happen to you. And those events that happen to me are for my benefit, and I can use them as an opportunity. They don't happen to me. They're not woe is me, the sky is falling, Murphy's Law. It's thank you. What did this happen for? How can I use this to grow or help others?
Beautiful. We're getting so many great comments here. I've put some up on the screen. Thank you guys for interacting and engaging, and feel free to ask any questions that you want me to ask in these last few minutes. So many things that I just thought of that I want to talk about. So now you have, you know, you're volunteering, you have become a huge advocate for the community. You do a lot of different work. You're a sober coach. You do coaching with people who want to get themselves clean. You even live in with them. You have lots of different options on your website. And you also have been doing some transportation work. So if somebody is dealing with a loved one and they want to get them into a facility, you're like a go-to guy that goes and makes sure that that happens. So today, hundreds of people have died from opiates, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the brutal reality that you made it.
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
Not everyone does.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things where I realize that I am, in a sense, I'm obligated. It is my duty at this point. Addiction, and opiates especially, did not kill me, and it kills a lot of people. Since it didn't kill me, I do feel that inner sense. That's why I became a sober coach and I started my website, which is sobercoaching.com. The reason I did that is because there was an inner fire inside of me that says, you have beaten something that kills a lot of people. Therefore, I knew that it was my duty to go out and dedicate my life to completely leave everything that I had built in my business before and leave it behind and dedicate my life to helping other people realize that this can be beaten and hopefully inspire them. But also in my coaching, like you mentioned, I try and help people understand, why are you doing this? Why are you using these drugs? Kind of like I had. There was a munch in my life. Of course, we've covered a couple. But whenever I say, what if, just what if for 1 second, what if those things that you're holding on to that you think are, that are traumatic, or that you think that are not overcomable, or that have harmed you or wronged you in some way, what if for just a microsecond you thought that those were for your benefit? And the deer in headlights look, I get it a lot. Sometimes I get the, how dare you say, even insinuate that my trauma might have been for my benefit. I said, what if that event or events in your life that you're holding on to, or things that you think are going to happen in the future, may have been for your benefit, so that you can gain strength as a human and go help others who might be struggling with that same thing. So yeah, I do sober coaching, of course. I do sober transport work.
Someone asked here if you sponsor.
I am not a sponsor. That's not what a coach is. But no, I don't do that.
Just so they know. And then we had another, so I'll come back to the other question in a second. I want to ask you something that just came up for me then. So hard with all the questions and the monitoring and that, and sometimes one slips out. Sure. So with all of the work that you do, like if we look at, you had 3 relapses. So Kimberly actually asked how many times you relapsed, and there was 3. And so statistically, people tend to relapse.
Like 300. I mean, I go
okay. To, there were you did 3 rehabs, but there were lots of relapses.
But a bazillion relapses within.
Right, which is very common. Like most people don't get clean or sober or just have 1 rehab stint. So in the books, I've read a lot of different memoirs and a lot of personal stories and a lot of addiction books and different things around this. And one of the things that I have noticed in people's journey is that they don't get clean until they start really opening up and doing the work. So when they are just going to a, what's more like a prison or a withdrawal center, but they're not doing the therapy or the deep, conversation, or they're just not talking, they're not opening up, they tend to relapse again and again and again. And the time that sticks is usually when they have that breakthrough of going, okay, I need to talk about what happened to me in my childhood, whatever it was. Has that been something you've seen a pattern of with people that you've worked with and with yourself?
Yeah, in fact, I get the relapse question a lot, like, don't you ever worry about relapse and what happens with relapse? And I kind of have a little bit of a different angle when we talk about relapse. I think I started writing a blog on my website recently, and one of the things I wrote about was how every day is game day when you're an addict. And what I mean by that is relapse is something where you've not prepared for relapse, in the sense that every day when you wake up, you must admit that at one point addiction beat you. You have been beaten by addiction. Therefore, it's a formidable opponent. It's a formidable opponent. You must realize that it beat you. What I do with helping people, what I coach in relapse, is say, okay, relapse is usually because you're unable to, there's some type of pain that you still have not processed, or there's something that you've not let go, or there's something you're still future tripping about that you think may happen to you in the future. I said, what if all of those things, past, present, and future, are meant to happen to you? What if they're for your benefit? I go, why do you want to feel differently about them? Because that's what drugs and alcohol are doing. We are so badly wanting to escape the internal the turmoil, the pain, anything we do. And there's one guarantee: drugs and alcohol, that's the guarantee. They will allow us to escape that pain, even though we know it's temporary, even though we know it's going to make things worse, even though we risk everything we love and hold near and dear to us, including our children, our family, our job, our money, our health. All of it. It's pain that we are so unable to deal with over something that we're willing to use or do drugs or alcohol. But if you stop and think, that thing that you want to feel differently about, if it's actually for your benefit, you need it in your life, it's a blessing, then why do we want to feel different? Why would you relapse? See, I tell people all the time, I go, if I want to drink or use, I can. I'm over 21. I've got a few dollars in my pocket, and there's a liquor store right down the street, right? I don't want alcohol and drugs in my life anymore. I can have it. I don't want it. There's a big difference. I don't want it because I feel that I don't want to escape the feelings I'm having. When pain comes in my life, I go, okay, pain, sit down. Sit down here next to me. Let's go through this together, because drugs and alcohol, not an option for me anymore. Therefore, anything that comes with trauma, turmoil, loss, whatever it is, drugs and alcohol are no longer an option in your life. Let's get it on. You know what I mean? You kind of have that, all right, pain, all right, loss, all right, fear. This is going to hurt.
I'm going to have to feel you. Well, you know what?
I think I come out so much stronger after you process it, because drugs and alcohol, they allow you not to fully process and feel the pain that's meant to feel as a human to become stronger. Drugs and alcohol allow you to go right up to that pain wall and stop. If you remove drugs and alcohol from the equation and you have to break through that pain wall, you come out on the other side superhuman to a certain extent. So.
Well, and I think not just with drugs and alcohol, we see a lot of people doing this with food. We're doing this with addictive behaviors, whether it's sexual. There's lots of different ways that we check out of dealing with our loneliness, our isolation, our inadequacy, our not good enough bullcrap in our head. So, for me, I think that I talk about making fear your best friend. And not labeling emotions, because when we numb our pain, we numb our joy. You actually can't be discerning with emotions. I worked with a psychotherapist a few years ago, and once I learned that, I went, oh my God, exactly what you're talking about. I need to make friends with fear. I have to be its BFF. I need to stop labeling it as a bad emotion. I need to be okay with sometimes I'm going to feel sad. I think we have a society, we've tried to teach people they have to be happy all the time, and that's not reality. So I love that. And I think that that's a powerful point for anybody who's listening. I think the first step is start being aware when you're using something to shift your feeling, when you're not eating because you're hungry, or you're not trying to take a pill because you have a back pain. You're actually trying to numb and not deal with pain and feelings. And then the second step is, well, how do I start shifting that? How do I choose differently? How do I teach myself healthy behaviors? How do I start putting back in self-love? And so you talked about a toolbox. You didn't have a toolbox in the beginning, so you didn't know what to do with all those feelings. So was there something specific, or is there something that you use regularly that's in that toolbox?
Yes, I do. I choose to be happy. I know that sounds very basic and elementary, but each day I wake up with gratitude, and certain days it's easier than others. Obviously, I'm a human being in the end. But what I realize, sometimes I wake up and I go, I just took a warm shower this morning. I can walk over to my fridge and get fresh drinking water. I have a car to drive. I have some things.
Well, this is actually, you call it happiness, but that's actually gratitude. And there is a ton of research around gratitude and how it affects our brain and how great it can make. It's a really great tool. And
I get so much happiness whenever I think about how lucky I am. Number one, how lucky I am to be alive. Sometimes I still can't, I'm like, did I really make it through this 20-year absolute debacle? And so I choose every day to be happy, because it is a choice. It's a choice, Kirsty, to go, no matter what happens, I'm going to be happy. And so, of course, I wear a smile a lot, and because again, I feel very lucky and grateful for what I have, and not worry about what I have not. And that does, like you said, gratitude is probably the number one keys of recovery, is just being grateful for what you have and not worrying about what you don't have, but also being just happy. It's a choice. I wake up every day and I go, I'm going to be happy today. And there's some days I'm like, but I don't like that. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, but I needed it. Oh yeah. I need everything.
Well, that's the thing about using the tools and choosing to do the work. It's easy to take a pill or to stuff our face. And I've been there. It is hard work to be healthy and functional in our life, but it brings so much joy when we get there. Now, Denise asked, is there hope to help someone if they don't acknowledge that they need help?
Ooh. I was one of those classic examples. You weren't telling me, I was going to do what I was going to do, and there was no stopping me. So yes, I think everyone has to reach, and everyone's bottom is different. You don't have to lose everything and end up under a bridge to hit bottom. Everyone's going to hit bottom at a different time, but there are certain things that that we can do, and that's of course sometimes called hard love and tough love, whatever. But you really have to let the addict go through their journey, and they'll come to a place. But one thing I will say is leading by example is always, important, in the sense that, it's hard to tell someone to, quit drinking all the time when you're drinking all the time in front of them. So, leading by example is always one of the things that I tell people is, and surrounding yourself. Who are you surrounding yourself with? Who is the addict surrounding himself with, as far as influences and things like that? So, but.
And what about with enabling? Like, would you suggest that as much as they want to help them, that at some point they have to, is there a balance? I know that parents, it's hard. Like, do you kick them out of the house if they're using, but then they could die a week later and you're left with that guilt for the rest of your life? Like, what is the...
If they're using, they could die anytime. So I think, it's one of those things like the worst of two evils, if you will, in the sense that, yes, you have to, the financial aspect of helping addicts, worst thing you could do. You must let that addict, help that addict, come to the point, their own bottom, where they realize that they need help. But whenever that person is asked for help, and that's why, if there's any addicts out there that are listening, please, look at me in my own life, in the sense I was suicidal, Kirsty. I mean, at the end of my run, I did not want to live anymore. That we were close. We were as close as you can get to taking one's life. But in the end, I think that you have to realize that what has happened in your past, whatever you're holding on to, look at me as an example, and all of the damage and all of the things that I had in my past, and all, to the point where I was ready to take my life. And now I consider myself to be in the best physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional condition of my life. So to know that it is possible, but you have to ask for help. It takes a lot of courage to ask for help. It takes a lot of pride swallowing and ego swallowing to go, yep, I'm an addict. Right here.
But there's still another chapter. You weren't finished, and you had a lot to give, and you're now doing amazing work, which I think, a lot of people, they find solace and help in overcoming the shame and the guilt by making meaning out of what's happened, and by being able to give back to their community, whether it's through volunteering or through the transportation work you do, or your blogging or Facebooking or interviews like this. You just never know who you've touched, who you've helped. So I know, my tagline for Kirsty TV is that when we share our stories, we heal ourselves and we heal others. So I truly believe in the message that you have and the work that you're doing, and prescription drugs is a personal pet peeve, passion of mine that gets me so upset, because I see so many senseless deaths and losses of beautiful, amazing people who don't want to die. They just don't want to feel the pain that they're in. So thank you so much for sharing your amazing story. For any extra comments that are continuing to come in, or any that I missed, I know that Aaron's going to be checking back in on the video and going through the comments and be able to comment there. So thank you for being with us tonight, Aaron.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor and a privilege to be here.
And so for anyone who's tuning in now, go back and watch the video. Check out the full story on Aaron's history and journey with overcoming opiate addiction. For anyone new, there are other videos on my Facebook page, on Kirsty TV YouTube. On the channel, there's over 100 videos where we've interviewed people previously on addiction and different issues around this, from alcoholism to prescription drugs to heroin. So please tune in and find something that works for you. And we've loved being with you. So thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thanks, Kirsty. Thank you.